There was a Tuesday morning about 4 years ago when I sat on the edge of my bed at 5:47 in the morning. I remember the time because I hadn't slept, not one wink, and I looked at a letter in my hand, a letter from the bank. And I made a decision right then and there that everybody in my life, everybody told me was going to ruin me. I was 63 years old. I had $340 to my name, and I was about to do the one thing my own daughter begged me not to do. Now, I'm not going to tell you what that decision was yet, because before I tell you what I did, I need you to understand what got me to that bed at 5:47 in the morning with $340 and a letter that felt like it weighed 100 pounds. I need you to understand who I was before I became who I am now. So stay with me a minute. Let me tell you my story. My name is Odessa. I'm 67 years old now. I was born in a small town outside Macon, Georgia, third of 6 children, and I joined the United States Army when I was 19 years old, mostly because I wanted to see something outside of that small town, and the Army was the only ticket I could afford. I served for 6 years. I'm proud of that time. I don't regret a day of it, but that's not really what this story is about. This isn't a war story. This is a story about what happens after. After the service, after the marriage, after the children grow up and move on, after the working years are behind you, when the world looks at you and decides you're finished. Because at 63, the world had decided I was finished. And here's the thing, for a while I believed them too. Let me back up. I worked 31 years as a hospital administrator. 31 years, same hospital, same parking spot practically. I raised 2 children as a single mother after my husband passed when my youngest was only 7. I did it all. The mortgage, the school clothes, the church ties, the Christmas mornings, on one income, and I never once asked anybody for a handout. I want you to remember that, because it matters for what comes later. When I turned 62, the hospital did what hospitals do. They called it restructuring. I called it what it was. They let me go. 31 years, and I got a cardboard box and a handshake from a man young enough to be my grandson. Now here's the thing nobody tells you about losing a job at 62. It's not like losing a job at 32. At 32, you dust yourself off. You send out 50 resumes. Somebody calls you back in a week. At 62, I sent out over 80 applications in 4 months. 80, you know how many callbacks I got? 3. And in every single interview, I could see it in their eyes, that little flicker when they did the math and realized how old I was. Nobody said it out loud. Nobody has to. You just feel a door quietly closing, over and over again, and after enough doors close on you, you start to believe maybe you're the problem. My pension was smaller than I expected. I won't get into the details, but let's just say it wasn't going to cover what my working years used to cover. My savings, what little I had, started disappearing into medical bills. My hip had started giving me trouble, and my hearing wasn't what it used to be either, if I'm honest with you. And my son, bless his heart, he was struggling himself, so I couldn't lean on him. My daughter, she loves me, don't get me wrong, but she had her own babies to raise, her own bills. So there I was, 63 years old, no job, shrinking savings, a body that didn't move the way it used to, and a letter from the bank that Tuesday morning telling me I was 2 months behind on my mortgage. That's when I made the decision. I decided I was going to start a business, Now, before you think this is going to be some fairy tale about how it was easy, it was not easy. Let me tell you about the day I told my daughter. She sat me down at her kitchen table and she said, "Mama, with all due respect, you are 63 years old. You don't have the energy for this. You don't have the money for this. Most businesses fail in the first year even when you're young and healthy. What happens if you lose the little bit you have left?" And here's the thing, she wasn't wrong to be scared. She loved me. Fear, when it comes from love, still sounds a whole lot like doubt. My own pastor, a man I respected for 20 years, told me, gently, but he told me, Odessa, maybe it's time to slow down. Maybe the Lord is trying to tell you to rest. Now I want to say something here, and I want you to really hear this, because this is something I had to learn the hard way. Sometimes the people who love you the most give you the worst advice, not because they're wrong about you, but because they're afraid for you. Fear disguises itself as wisdom all the time, and you have got to learn the difference between someone protecting you and someone limiting you, because they can look identical from the outside. So what was this business, you ask? I had been sewing since I was 7 years old. My grandmother taught me on a machine that ran off a foot pedal, no electricity at all. Over the years, everybody in my family, everybody in my church, came to me for alterations, hemming pants, taking in dresses, fixing zippers. I never charged much. I did it out of love. But somewhere in those sleepless nights leading up to that Tuesday, I remembered something my grandmother used to say. Odessa, don't you ever let a gift sit in a drawer collecting dust because you're too scared to sell it. So with $340, and I mean I counted every dollar of it twice, I bought thread, I bought a used serger machine from a woman 2 streets over who was getting rid of her mother's old sewing equipment, and I put up a single flyer at the laundromat. Alterations by Miss Odessa. Fair prices. Fast work. Se habla poquito español. That was the whole marketing plan. One flyer. One laundromat. Here's the thing about starting over at 63 that nobody warns you about. Your body and your pride fight you every single day in 2 completely different ways. My hip would lock up after sitting at that machine for 2 hours straight. I had to teach myself to work in 20-minute stretches, stand up, stretch, sit back down. Some mornings the pain was so bad I cried before I even got out of bed. But I want you to understand something. Pain doesn't stop you from working. Pain just makes you smarter about how you work. And the pride? Oh, the pride was worse than the hip. I remember the first time a customer, a young woman, maybe 30 years old, looked at my little setup in my converted garage and said, "Oh, is this like a hobby for you?" She didn't mean any harm by it, but something in me just about broke in half. A hobby. 31 years running hospital departments, 6 years serving my country, and this child looked at my business like it was something to pass the time. I finished her hem. I did it perfectly, like I do everything. And I didn't say a word about how that comment cut me. But I'll tell you what I did do. I went inside that night, and I sat with it. And here's what I decided. I was not going to let one careless comment from a stranger define 30 years of skill. I was going to let my work speak for me. That's a metaphor I want you to hold on to, because it applies far beyond sewing. When the world underestimates you, you don't have to argue with them. You just have to keep doing excellent work until the excellence itself becomes impossible to ignore. Arguing with a doubter is like trying to sweep water uphill. It wastes energy you don't have to spare. Let your results do the arguing. Money was tight those first 6 months. I mean tight. There were weeks I ate eggs and toast for dinner 3, 4 nights in a row so I could put gas in my car to deliver finished garments. I didn't tell my children how bad it got because I didn't want their worry, and honestly, I didn't want their doubt confirmed either. There's a particular kind of loneliness in struggling quietly because you're too proud to let the people who warned you see how close their warning came to being right. But something started happening around month 4. Word was spreading, not fast, slow, the way real trust spreads. One satisfied customer telling one friend. A woman brought me her daughter's wedding dress to altar. Do you understand what an honor that is? A mother trusts a stranger with her daughter's wedding dress. I stayed up until 2 a.m., 3 nights that week, making sure every stitch was perfect. When that bride cried happy tears seeing herself in the mirror, her mother hugged me so hard she nearly knocked the wind out of me. That's when I understood something. I wasn't just fixing hymns anymore. I was stitching myself back together, one garment at a time. By month 8, I had more work than I could handle alone. I want you to sit with that for a second. 8 months prior, I had $340 in a bank letter that felt like a death sentence. 8 months later, I was turning away work. That's when I made my second big decision. I hired help. My first employee was a 19-year-old girl from my church who was raising a baby alone and needed steady income. I saw myself in her, a young woman trying to build something out of almost nothing. I taught her everything my grandmother taught me. Isn't that something? My grandmother's hands teaching my hands, teaching her hands. 60 years of knowledge passed down a chain of women who refused to quit. By year 2, I had moved out of my garage into a small storefront, nothing fancy, but it was mine. I had 3 employees. I was doing alterations, custom formal wear, and I'd even started teaching a Saturday morning sewing class for young people in the neighborhood, mostly because I remembered what it felt like to have a grandmother willing to teach you a skill for free. And here's the part that still makes me emotional when I think about it. My daughter, the same daughter who sat me down at that kitchen table and told me I didn't have the energy, the money, the years left to gamble on something like this, she came into my shop one Saturday afternoon, unannounced, and she just stood in the doorway watching me work with a customer. I didn't even notice her at first. When I finally looked up, she had tears running down her face. She said, "Mama, I was so scared of losing you to this. I wasn't trying to hold you back. I was trying to protect you." And I told her, what I'm going to tell you now, baby, I know. But sometimes the thing that looks like it's going to break you is actually the thing that puts you back together. You just have to be brave enough to find out which one it is. That business, the one everyone told me I was too old, too broke, too tired to start, that business now brings in more money in a year than my hospital pension pays me in 2. I'm not telling you that to brag. I'm telling you because I need somebody out there watching this. Somebody sitting in their own version of my 5:47 a.m. morning to understand something. Here's the thing about age that this world gets so wrong. This world treats age like it's a closing door, Like every birthday after 60 is just one more nail in a coffin they've already started building for you in their mind. But I'm here to tell you, age isn't a closing door. Age is a paid-off debt. By the time you reach your 60s and 70s, you have already paid, in full, for the wisdom that a 25-year-old is still borrowing against. You just have to decide whether you're going to spend that wisdom on yourself or let it sit unused in a drawer. Same as my grandmother used to warn me about. I think about that letter from the bank sometimes, and I've come to believe that letter wasn't the end of something. It was a doorbell. It was life ringing my doorbell and asking, politely but firmly, Odessa, are you going to keep hiding, or are you going to answer? I want to say something to whoever is watching this, especially if you're my age or older. Especially if somebody in your life has told you it's too late for you to start something new. Let me tell you a hard truth. Some of the people who love you the most will hand you the smallest version of your own future. Not because they want you small, but because a smaller version of you feels safer to love. It's easier to worry about someone when you've already decided their story is finished. But you get to decide when your story is finished. Not your children, not your pastor, not the young woman who called your 30 years of skill a hobby. I'm not saying it's easy. I sat on textbooks. I sat with pain in my hip most days. Some weeks I ate eggs for dinner 4 nights running, and there were nights I cried myself to sleep wondering if my daughter had been right all along. Anybody who tells you starting over at 63 is easy is trying to sell you something. But I will tell you this, it was worth every single hard morning. Because on the other side of that fear was a version of myself I hadn't met yet. A woman running her own shop. A woman teaching young girls a skill that will feed their families long after I'm gone. A woman who proved to herself more than anybody else that 63 isn't an ending, it's just a different kind of beginning. So if you're sitting there right now, in your own kind of 5:47 in the morning, maybe it's not a business, maybe it's a relationship you need to mend, a dream you buried 30 years ago, a skill sitting in a drawer collecting dust because somebody once told you it was just a hobby. I want you to hear this from somebody who's lived it. It is not too late. I don't care what the calendar says. I don't care what anybody else has decided about your future. The only person with the authority to close the book on your life is you, and as long as you're breathing, that book is still open. My grandmother used to say, don't you ever let a gift sit in a drawer. I'm 67 years old now, and some mornings my hip still locks up at that sewing machine. But every single morning I choose to sit down at it anyway. Because I learned the hard way at 63 years old, broke and scared and told I was too old, that the drawer was never the safe place. The drawer was where dreams went to die quietly with nobody around to mourn them. Don't let yours die quietly. If this story meant something to you, if it reminded you of your own drawer, your own gift, your own 5:47 in the morning, I want to hear about it. Tell me in the comments what you're still holding on to. And if you know somebody who needs to hear that it's not too late for them either, send them this video. Sometimes the difference between a dream that dies in a drawer and a dream that changes somebody's whole life is just one person believing in it before you're brave enough to believe in it yourself. I'll see you in the next story. Take care of yourselves. And go on, open that drawer.